Good evening, folks. Thank you very much for taking the time to tune in to our evening broadcast. If you've been following our social media channels, YouTube, Facebook, over the last few weeks during lockdown, you'll know that it's been our practice to put up a recording of our drive-in meeting in the evening at 6 p.m. approximately. Well, this morning we had to cancel our drive-in meeting. Unfortunately, there's been a bad snowfall over last night and this morning, and when we got up here this morning in the countryside, we were welcomed by a blanket of snow, and it just wasn't wise and prudent to have a drive-in meeting in the middle of snow this morning. So we're doing this instead, and we trust that although we've just put this together this afternoon, and we trust that the few thoughts that we bring to you will be an encouragement to your heart today, the Sabbath day, as you look to the Lord for strength and for grace in these strange days. Just after the meeting was cancelled this morning, my mind was turned to this portion, to Job chapter 19. And we want to think about hope, or Job's hope in a hopeless world. Job's hope in a hopeless world. And I just want to read a few fairly familiar verses to you if you have familiarity with the Bible or familiar with Christian terms, or even in funerals, these verses are often used and read and quoted. So Job 19 verses 25, 26, 27. Remember, Job has endured horrendous physical suffering, and yet he states, Job 19:25, I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes behold, and not another, though my reins be consumed within me. Job's hope in a hopeless situation. I read of a story by a man named Gary Corr. And Gary Corr, he spoke of Chippy, the parakeet. And he spoke of this parakeet always singing, always speaking to his owner. Every time you would pass the cage, this parakeet would sing something to you, would speak something that would lift the spirits. Something bad happened to Chippy the parakeet, and Gary Corr spoke of this terrible experience of Chippy the parakeet being blown over, washed up, and sucked in. Blown over, washed up, and sucked in. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, what on earth happened this parakeet? Well, what actually happened Chippy the parakeet, to lead Gary Corr describe it as being blown over, washed up, and sucked in, was that its owner had the hoover, was cleaning out the cage, as owners do with birds. And sadly, she didn't realise that she'd actually sucked up Chippy the parakeet. And Chippy had got lodged in the airbag and so on, or the bag, the hoover bag, the vacuum bag. Now, she was able to break Chippy free. But Gary Corr, he described Chippy the parakeet after that terrible ordeal as being washed up, blown over, and sucked in. Now, what happened to Chippy the parakeet, you're probably wondering. Well, the bird was okay, but Gary Corr, he remarked that he never sang again. This ordeal had a tremendous impact, terrible impact, upon this parakeet. Now, when you think about the experiences of Job, I believe that you could describe Job perhaps in a similar way. Job had went through horrendous physical suffering, and a horrendous emotional suffering as well, might I add. Think of Job chapter 1. Job loses everything, loses his family business, and even loses his health as well. And I believe that as you read of the experience of Job, and then on into chapter 2, where Job's wife comes and tells him, curse God and die, in Job 2 verse 10, Job, you could describe him perhaps as Chippy the parakeet, is blown over, washed up, and sucked in. And perhaps Job is even lost his singing voice. Certainly in the opening half of the book of Job, until we get to Job chapter 19, it's a very, very somber note of complaint that is coming from Job. Job, he's grappling with the issues here of him suffering. Why has God permitted this? What's the real reason behind this? Why am I suffering as a righteous man? And yet chapter 19 marks a profound change in the perspective of Job as he views his suffering. And in Job 19, as I've said, these few verses, I believe they highlight where Job was at. What was it that brought about this change of perspective? What was it that brought him such certainty, that brought him such hope in this hopeless situation? And I believe that it was simply a personal relationship with his Redeemer. He was able to say, I know that my Redeemer liveth. He had this wonderful, this personal assurance that he had a Redeemer, that was his Redeemer, and that amidst his physical suffering and amidst all that Job was going through, he knew that his Redeemer was still very much alive, and then of course would be with him, would be overseeing all that Job was going through. And again, you know that these days they feel hopeless. Certainly this past week again has brought another discouraging report from the executive in Northern Ireland here anyway. Lockdowns being extended to March. Our own presbytery will have to make a decision on this, but it probably will be that we will be closed now until March. Again, we took the decision to open or to close, and we will take the decision to open again. Churches can voluntarily and have voluntarily closed. But as I've said, the situation, it feels so hopeless. And yet perhaps you're here this morning, you're here and you're thinking, what is it that's going to bring me hope amidst all of my hopelessness? Perhaps you're outside of God today and you're thinking, what is it really that brings hope amidst this hopeless situation that we're in? I believe we have the answer here in Job's wonderful declaration in Job chapter 19 that we've read for you. I know that my Redeemer liveth. He knows. He knows that in spite of all that he's going through, that there was one in heaven, Jesus Christ, his Redeemer, who was alive, and of course, as I've said, was with him and was overseeing him and was watching over him at this time. So just for a few moments tonight, we want to think about Job's hope in a hopeless situation. First thing I think we see here in this wonderful statement of Job is that Job here, he speaks of a Redeemer. He speaks of a Redeemer. Verse 25, as I have said, I know that my Redeemer liveth. He calls someone here his Redeemer. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, the term Redeemer here in the Hebrew, it is redemption. And it really refers to the price, a redemption or a ransom price that was paid to secure someone or something. For example, it was used of slaves. It was used of slaves as they were delivered from the slave market, as a wealthy individual came and paid the price to secure that slave. They were delivered from their plight of being in the slave market. That individual has paid the price to secure them. It was even used of purchasing property. In Ruth chapter 4, you read of Boaz paying the redemption price to secure a piece of ground belonging to Naomi's late husband Elimelech. So it was used, as I've said, for a price that was paid to secure something, and of course to deliver that thing, that object, that person from its plight. And here's Job. As I've said, he's in a horrendous plight. Physically, he's suffering. He is suffering from horrendous health. Physically. He has suffered emotionally. He has suffered the horrendous plight of losing his family. And yet he speaks here of his Redeemer. He speaks then of one who, of course, has paid the price to secure him, to release him. Now, this is profound because think about Job. Job was a righteous man. In the opening few verses of Job, the book Job chapter 1, he is described as someone who feared God and eschewed evil. In the next few verses down, Job is described as someone who sanctified his children. In other words, he set them apart. He prayed for them. He prayed for his children. He wanted to see them walk in the ways of the Lord. So the picture that you have of Job here is someone who is a righteous man. And yet withal he recognized that there was someone who came and paid the price to secure his freedom. Jesus Christ. Now the amazing thing about this declaration is that Jesus Christ had not yet even come the first time to die on the cross. Job wrote these words long before Christ's first coming. And yet he states, I know that my Redeemer liveth. He has this certain hope as he speaks of a redemption. He's really saying, look, I did not deserve to be delivered. I deserved to be cut off from God because of my sin. And yet there was someone who came and paid the price, who would come and paid the price to secure my ransom. Now, think about Job. As I've said, he was a righteous man. But he knew his sin and he felt his sin often. Job 15:16, how abominable and filthy is man. In Job 25 verse 4, he states, how can man be clean that is born of a woman? So here's Job, as I said, he's a righteous man himself. He's someone who fears God, and yet he knows within his heart that there's sin. How abominable and filthy is man, which drinks iniquity like water. Are you getting the picture here? Here is Job, and he recognizes that he is a sinner. He recognizes that he needed someone to come and pay the price for his redemption. And so there's this wonderful hope that in spite of the fact that he lived an upright and a moral and a religious life, yet his sin separated between him and God. But yet there would be one who would come and be his Redeemer. Can you say that this evening? Can you say that you have a personal relationship with the Redeemer? Jesus Christ, why did he come? Ephesians 1:7. To provide redemption and forgiveness from sin through the blood. Jesus Christ is the Redeemer. 1 Peter 1 tells us that we are redeemed not with corruptible things such as silver or gold, but by the precious blood of Christ. Jesus Christ is described as the Redeemer. Why do you need a Redeemer tonight amidst all of the hopelessness of all that's going on? Because as Job said, whether you be a righteous individual or an unrighteous individual, in the sense that you live a clean life, an upright life, a moral life in society. Yet Job, this righteous man, one of the most righteous men in the Bible, he stated how abominable is man. He drinks up iniquity like water. Can a man that is born of woman, can he be clean? He's speaking of the fact that no matter how upright we may try to live and how we may try to please God, we are sinful. My friend, you are sinful. You are sinful. And you need to understand this. But my friend, do not dwell on that because there is a Redeemer. Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, he died on the cross. Why? To pay the ransom price for your sin. And yes, there you are, and you feel yourself to be in the slave market of sin, and yet Jesus Christ, he redeems you and sets you free. Can you say tonight, as you're listening to this, that amidst the hopelessness of this situation, that you have this certain hope, this hope of your Redeemer? You have this personal relationship with Jesus Christ who provides redemption from sin. Can you say, I know that my Redeemer lives? And can you say that you have this wonderful relationship with your Redeemer? We must move on. He speaks of a Redeemer. He also speaks here of a resurrection. In verse 26 of Job 19, we read, though After my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh I shall see God. As I've said, Job has suffered horrendously in terms of his physical affliction. Verse 20 of this chapter actually refers to this. My bone cleaveth to my skin, and to my flesh, and I am escaped with the skin of my teeth. We've heard that saying before. We use that saying, so and so they got out of it by the skin of their teeth. That's a biblical saying. Job says this. But in the opening half of this verse, Job 19 verse 20, he really is describing in very, very vivid language his physical affliction. He speaks of the fact that his bones cleaving to the skin. What he's really saying is this, is that you could see my bones through my skin. The skin is all broken, it's full of blotches, it's full of boils. In another part in this book, he speaks of taking a potsherd, piece of clay, and scraping his skin just for relief. Job is enduring horrendous physical affliction. And yet he makes this remarkable statement in verse 26. He states that after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh I shall see God. What is he speaking of here? He's speaking of the fact that there's going to come a day when Jesus Christ will take Job's body and will resurrect that body, and in Job's flesh, in his body, he will see God. And so Job here looks beyond the first coming of Christ, and he sees the second coming of Christ. And he cleaves to that wonderful comfort that here he is in physical affliction. Here he is, and one day he's going to be laid to the dust. Worms will destroy his flesh, yet his body will be made anew. There will be the resurrection of the dead. Jesus Christ, having not merely died for the soul, but also died for the body, as Romans 8 tells us, the redemption of the body. Jesus Christ one day will raise Job's body that has endured physical suffering, will make it perfect. Can you say that you have this assurance and this hope tonight as you're listening on? Can you say that in spite of the fact that my body is physically suffering here on earth, that one day I am hoping, I am trusting, I am resting in Jesus Christ. And as his body was raised from the dead on the third day, so whenever he returns to this earth, my body will follow suit. You know, Job, this was Job's hope throughout this book. In Job 14 verse 14, he asks the question, if a man dies, shall he live again? And he goes on to answer his own question, because he states in the second half of that verse, all the days of my appointed time will I wait till my change comes. In other words, he's saying this, all of the days of my life. The Hebrew really has the idea of warfare. All the days of my struggle, all the days of my warfare, will I wait till my change comes. Speaking here about the change that's going to occur to his body. Again, 1 Corinthians 15, verses 54 and 55 speaks of this mortal body hath put on immortality. Our bodies one day will die. We will die. The soul will live on, yes, but the body physically, it will decay and eventually it will die. And yet, that's not the end. If a man dies, shall he live again? My friend, one day the scriptures clearly teach us that Christ will return to this world and your body will be reunited with your soul. And as 1 Corinthians 15 states, it will put on immortality. Your body will be made anew. Job, as he stated, will I wait till my change comes? What is the relevance of this to the Christian? Well, the next verse in 1 Corinthians 15 teaches, O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? Death, the last enemy, he is defeated in the life of a Christian, because your body one day will conquer death. It will conquer death. It will be raised in incorruption, sown in corruption, but raised in incorruption, raised in perfection, raised in immortality. This old body of yours that perhaps has contracted coronavirus and is riddled with disease and riddled with sickness and riddled with frailty. This body one day of yours is going to be perfect. And like Job, you'll be able to say, in my flesh, in this old body of mine that will be laid to the dust, whether through coronavirus or not, one day it will be raised. And one day it will see God face to face. One day you're going to see God in this body, changed body, yes, but nonetheless this body, this body that God has given to you, you're going to see God. My, can you say that you're in Jesus Christ this evening? And my, that this is your hope, that one day come that day of the resurrection of the just and the unjust, that this old body of yours will see God in the face, see God in the flesh, and it will be a redeemed body, a body for which Christ himself has died for, and a body like unto Christ's body. My, is this your hope today? Is this your certainty in death? That all the days of your appointed time, you're just waiting till your change comes. So Job here, he speaks of a redeemer, he speaks of a resurrection, then he speaks also lastly of a reunion. Verse 27, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another. Again, verse 25, he shall stand at that latter day upon the earth. See the certainty that Job has here? Job hasn't even experienced the first coming of Christ. That will not happen for thousands of years. Job is a patriarch. And yet he looks beyond the first coming to the second coming. And he states in verse 25 that Christ is going to stand in the latter day. He's going to stand upon the earth. But verse 27 speaks of, as I've said, that reunion, whom I shall see for myself and not another. Ah, yes, there'll be multitudes in that day, but Job's saying this, I'm going to be reunited with God. I'll see him for myself. I'll not see another. I'll see him for myself. And one day, come that day of reunion, I have this hope that I am ready. My, should I be taken today? Should I be taken 10 years from now? I have this hope that my Redeemer liveth, and I know that he lives, and I'll see him for myself face to face. Can I say tonight, what a hope for you in this hopeless situation that we find ourselves in, where we're surrounded by death, surrounded by disease, and surrounded by decay. You can say like Job, I'll see him face to face. And like the old hymnist states, and sing the story, saved by grace. Are you ready for the day of reunion? Are you ready for that day when you'll see God face to face? Are you ready for that day when Christ will return and he will stand upon this earth and he will judge the just and the unjust? He will judge the righteous and the unrighteous. And he will deal his judgments accordingly. What is it that's going to give you hope this evening as you listen on to this broadcast? Like Job, I know that my Redeemer liveth. Can you say that tonight? I trust that you can. I trust that you have this full assurance that you know that your Redeemer lives and that you have this hope in a hopeless situation. And if you don't, then don't be afraid to get in contact with us. You'll find our details on our Facebook page, email, mobile phone. We're certainly here to talk to you. If we could speak to you as well with everything going on. But don't put this matter off. Ensure that you have this hope tonight, that you know that your Redeemer lives. May God bless his word to your hearts and lives this evening.